Hello, and welcome to another episode of Leadership Lessons. I'm Rob Patterson, Evangelism Team Leader with the Kentucky Baptist Convention. I'm sitting in today as guest host for our Executive Director Treasurer, Dr. Todd Gray. Excited to be here with my friend, John Barnett, and our topic of conversation is ministering to displaced peoples. John, first of all, welcome, and thank you for your willingness to be a part of Leadership Lessons.
Hey, thank you, Rob. Thank you for the opportunity to come on and to share, be with my KBC family.
Let me tell you just a little bit about John Barnett. John serves in a newly created role as Director of Diaspora Mobilization with the International Mission Board, also in partnership with the North American Mission Board. Prior to accepting this new role, John served 3 years here at the Kentucky Baptist Convention as a missions strategist, did an amazing job serving our churches. Prior to that, John had more than 13 years experience with the IMB, where he led urban church planting teams in Uganda, North Africa, and parts of Europe. He received an MDiv in International Church Planting from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary right here in Louisville, Kentucky. He and his wife, Rebecca, have been married for 24 years now and blessed with 2 amazing daughters, Rachel and Sarah. John, again, welcome to the conversation. It occurs to me that before we jump in, it might be helpful to define a couple of terms. Your new title is Director of Diaspora Mobilization. So could you just define diaspora and maybe go ahead and also explain what you mean when you're referring to displaced peoples?
Sure. So diaspora is just simply the Greek word for scattering. It would just mean, in this context, those who have been, whether they've been forced out or by a choice, have chosen to go to another country, but it's those who have left their homelands, those who have gone and moved to another country, to another location. Those are the ones that have been scattered throughout the world. That is simply the diaspora. And in the context of North America and what we're talking about with IMB and NAM is simply those that are refugees, international students, and immigrants. And then what I mean by displaced people, that's something that we started using a term here at KBC when I was working here, was trying to help people to understand what was going on in our world today. And so I just would talk about it in 4 categories. Those that are forcibly displaced, that's your refugees. Those that have been driven out from their home but are still within their country, those internally displaced. I talked about people who had been vulnerably displaced, human trafficking and other situations there. But for the topic of our conversation, it would also include those that are purposely displaced. That's immigrants, that's international students, that's migrant workers, meaning simply they have had a choice in what they've chosen to do, or a choice has been made for them. And then others with our disaster relief is naturally displaced. But that's what we mean by displaced people.
Thank you. That's wonderfully helpful in general. And then those 4 categories especially are really helpful in clarifying what it is we're talking about. Take a couple steps back. Could you share with us, John, how God used your experience as an international missionary with IMB to build this burden and passion that you have for ministering to displaced peoples, whatever category they might be in?
Yeah, so of course, as you said, when we graduated from Southern, my wife and I both, we went overseas, and we spent 6 years in Uganda and then 7 years in North Africa, and part of that time in Europe. But it was really when we were in Uganda that, as we were serving in the capital city, Kampala, because of, you may have heard of them, the Lord's Resistance Army, a guy, Joseph Kony, who was a guy leading a cultic group that was attacking villages all in northern Uganda. People were being driven out of their homes because of violence and persecution. That's what caused someone to be forcibly displaced. And thousands of people were starting to come into the city. And so as we were working with the churches and trying to plant churches, we started to ask the questions, how can we minister to them, and how can we meet them where they're at? And that's really when I started getting a burden for those that were being, especially refugees, being forcibly displaced. We also had people coming in from the Congo at that time trying to rebuild their life when they got to the capital city. So it was during that time that God really shaped kind of a passion and a burden for those that had been driven out of their homes. And so we started dealing with the issues of how do we actually help them where they're at. Obviously, people in this situation need food, need housing, but how do you do that with the critical part of gospel intentionality? How do you help, but also be able to share the gospel? But it was during that time that we had a passion for it. And then as we went to North Africa and into Europe, God had us in positions to help minister to North Africans, and especially in Europe, as immigrants coming into the country. And so again, just throughout our time on the mission field, we had a lot of experience of dealing with refugees. We dealt with international students, but as well as immigrants. So it was over that time, but it's really in Uganda where we got that burden.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing some of your experience. John, as you continue to observe the just incredible migration of people groups that's happening today for a variety of global factors, some of the war situations and a lot of other factors that we probably wouldn't have time to even go all through in a conversation like this. But as you see that migration of peoples that's happening, what are some of the exciting opportunities you see for the advancement of the gospel?
Yeah, so we live in an incredibly unique time for fulfilling the Great Commission. We don't celebrate, I always say to people, we don't celebrate the evil acts of evil men, because we know some of the people that have been displaced is through horrific tragedy. But what we do say is the church ready to meet people where they're at? And as people are coming into the country, who better than the church to be there to meet them? Well, God's bringing some of the least reached people groups in the world and literally placing them within arm's length of the local church. And so the opportunities we have are to step in and engage. I know it can be a little intimidating, but with a little help and coming alongside, we can step in. We have opportunities to serve people, help them to get set up, and to share the love of Christ, share the gospel with them. And in the midst of that displacement, God uses that so often to open people's hearts. And they're asking questions about what's going on in the world today. And we're there to tell them, hey, listen, we're happy to help you. We love to serve you. Because of the love of Christ, we have the greatest news in all the world. Christ died for you, and to share the gospel and to see people come to know the Lord. So it is a really unique time. We're seeing churches get involved. It's an exciting time to get involved in missions right here in your own state or in your neighborhood, in your community.
Yeah, so everything you just talked about is going to absolutely be exciting to the average church, the opportunities that are there, the potential. And you've already said this a little bit, but I'm wondering, could you give beyond their giving to the cooperative program, beyond their giving to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering and other missions offerings, what are some specific ways an average local Baptist church could get involved in ministering directly to displaced peoples?
Sure. So some of the things that we've done in our work with through the convention here or with Send Relief is one thing they can do is form what we call a welcome team. A way that they can work out of their Sunday school class or community group, work with resettlement agencies if that's happening in their city or state, to help to receive refugees as they come into the state, or to think of that same idea and to help get connected through your BCM and that with your Baptist work on or Baptist fellowship on campus, to come alongside there and to help receive international students. You know, one of the biggest things that happens, and with immigrants as well, is the average person says, hey, listen, it may be an average of nearly 5 years before they're invited over to the home of someone that they would consider to be American, that they would be from this country. And so one of the simplest things is finding those touches to welcome them in, being able to work with already existing structures so you can get connected, and be able to invite people over to your home and just open that door and see how God's at work. Also, with things like Send Relief and through our cooperative giving, there are ministry centers that are out there that you can go to help get some experience and some training, or connecting with local ministries. There are all sorts of opportunities. Those are some of the simple ways to journey with them, but there's plenty of ways. But the biggest is to step in and get connected. I would look at your state convention, your association. Is there a ministry there that can help you get connected, help you with some of the cross-cultural pieces? But don't be afraid. It's not as hard as you think. So
that's a good word, John. And so that's all very helpful. But you already recognize my next question, because you're kind of saying it's not as hard as it sounds. I'm confident there's some people listening that think, man, that sounds great. That's amazing. Yeah. I'm so glad John Barnett has that experience and the gifting, and so glad he can effectively minister. I'm not sure that's something that our church or that I could ever do. So you've already given some really good handlebars there. But I'm wondering, could you share a time when you had an opportunity to minister to a displaced person or a family, maybe right here in Louisville, John, that could give them a real life example of what this could look like?
Sure. So in working with the local church here, I'll be a little bit security sensitive, but I can share some of the details. We were welcoming in a family, and I can say where they're from Syria. And as the church, they were a little bit intimidated. They said, hey, listen, we've never done anything like this before. But I worked directly with them, so I was personally involved in this situation. And as we came alongside, I'll just say, for lack of a better name, Muhammad and his family and help them to get set up. As the church began to have touches with them, they began to realize that Muhammad, Fatima, their son Ibrahim, they're not really any different than us. They've been through a terrible situation. We're trying to help them to get set up, but really what's missing in their life is to know Christ. And so as the church is coming around them, beginning to develop relationship, what I've seen happen over and over is usually I tell the church, hey, just try to do something once a week. Do a short term, 2 to 3 months, try to get relationships started there. Usually the churches, once they get going, they want to do more and more. Right. But in this situation, just to give you a unique way of how God's at work in this, so with Muhammad and his family, they started to want to know more about why people were doing this. The church is able to share the gospel. But one thing Muhammad said was, like so many other people that have been displaced here, they have family that are back in, whether it's a refugee camp or back where they're from. Sure. And Muhammad said, my mom is really sick, and we started praying for her. And so through security ways, because of connections we have overseas, I said to Muhammad, hey, what if I could get someone, I can't promise, but what if I could get someone to visit your mom? And he said, really? You would do that? And I said, yeah, I can try. And again, through secure means, connected with teams we have on the ground that were working in the refugee camp. Actually, they were having a hard time getting into that refugee camp. But once Muhammad's mom invited them to come, God opened that door. And to make a long story short, what was awesome was as they went and visited, Muhammad's mom became a believer. Wow. And she started having Bible study there in the camp. Wow. And God has used her to open a door into that community for others to come to know the Lord. And unfortunately, but fortunately at the same time, in terms of life and God's just miraculous providence there, she died last year, but she didn't die to go to an eternal hell. She died to go to an eternal heaven. Yeah. And she's come to know the Lord. Now Muhammad and his wife are involved in a Bible study here in Louisville, Kentucky.
Wow, that's amazing. And a snapshot of how the Lord can move if we're available and willing to step out. And so let me lean in there just a little more, John. You've already mentioned this, but when you're talking about the incredible opportunities in front of us, we hear that some of the least reached people groups globally are increasingly living locally within Kentucky. Neighborhoods around us. And so could you come back again, just talk a little more about the strategic opportunity that exists for a local church to be involved in seeing that people group reached for Christ?
Yeah, so you have an opportunity to step in and in some simplistic ways get to know and develop real relationship with many people who have never heard the gospel. You know, as people have been driven all over the world, whether they've made a choice to come, an international student, or a family that's migrated here, or it is a refugee situation. For example, with the Afghans, you have an opportunity to step in and to develop real relationship and to be able to share the gospel. And you might even be one of the first people to ever explain to them who Christ really is. And I know we're not trying to be the first at everything, but it's an amazing opportunity to fulfill the Great Commission. Because as I just shared before, not only are we seeing people come to know the Lord here, but through their connections, they're able to start sharing with those back in the homelands, and it just opens up great opportunities. So for your church to catch a vision for mission, for international mission, you can do that right here in your state and start to engage. And it's really amazing opportunity that we have as the church to learn and get equipped and to be able to share the gospel with those who are lost in the darkness of Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism, and to be able to share with them that those are not the ways that God has designed. God created you, he loves you, and be able to tell them about Christ.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you, John. Had an opportunity not long ago to spend an entire day with one of our IMB families that's serving in an area of the world where persecuted church and incredibly close. They're the people group they've been trying to minister to for over a decade now. You know, just point something reached for Christ. And they shared that this is one of the people groups that has a growing population right here in Kentucky. and we drove through some of the neighborhoods in one of our Kentucky towns, and it was just encouraging for me to hear them saying, you know, one of our primary prayer strategies now is that this people group they were in Kentucky, so they said, we're praying that they might be reached, discipled by a Kentucky Baptist church,
Amen.
that they might be trained and sent back home to be used by God to start, you know, a movement of God among their own people. That was so compelling to hear and to pray about what that could look like. And that's the same exact thing that you're saying. And that is a compelling vision, and you've made it a little more accessible. But a lot of our churches say, okay, that's exciting, but we still feel a little under-equipped. We're maybe not sure where to find a resource or some of the things that John talked about. So what are some of the ways, John, that your new team that's being developed is going to try and help churches that have a desire to minister to displaced peoples?
Yeah, so similar to what I was doing here in Kentucky, and as you mentioned, one of the best ways to get involved is to simply start praying and prayer walking through your communities and do what I call discover the opportunities, looking for peoples who are from other countries that God might open those opportunities up. But our team is available. We're coming alongside with state conventions, with associations, with the local church to help provide some resources for you to be able to. We've done a lot of research, so to be able to help you discover who might be in your community, to provide some cross-cultural training and equipping that can help your church take that step. And in certain situations, whether it's us or someone that we've helped to equip within the state, can actually, you know, go with you. Part of it is just saying, hey, take that first step. Yeah. As you know, as you do evangelism, anything, take that step into engage and watch God open the door. But we have training to help you to go from whether it's a zero or whether you're on down the road, and we want to journey with you in conjunction with the conventions and associations to help see people come to know the Lord. Because as you mentioned, it's never a matter of if, it's only a matter of when people believe, when we share the gospel, right? Jesus saves. So then we have to answer the question, what do we do now? What do we do if they say yes? And so we help them to, whether they come into that existing work to start becoming a disciple, great. Is there, as you alluded to, an international work that they could get connected with so they could grow? Or collectively, do we need to start a new work? But we'll help you answer simple questions of, how do I get started? How do I begin to, you know, build a pathway into that community? How do we actually start to create community and use the gifts and skills that our church has and those that have come to the table to engage? How do we live sacrificially in the community, give you the tools to help equip you to share the gospel, and then working with you, your church, association, state convention, to say, hey, as we share and people come to know the Lord, how can we make disciples who can make disciples and see the kingdom grow?
That's great, John. Is there already a website or a link where folks can connect to your team, or?
Well, we are actually launching a thing called the DM Collective. So if you go to dmcollective.org, that will be here starting in early March. Resources are going to start coming onto that page. Okay. And they could actually, if someone wanted to, there's a conference called Reaching the Nations that is put on by IMB, North American Mission Board, WMU, all of our mission partners, and we're putting it on in Alpharetta. That's March 9th through 11th. Certainly they could register and come to that, but that's going to be a tool that we'll be able to have to gather resources as well as to make connections with our team that we can best serve you and come alongside.
Yeah, that's exciting. And so you mentioned earlier, I want to repeat just again for clarity for our Kentucky Baptists that there's opportunities right there in your own neighborhood. So get out and prayer walk and see what God is moving. Be open to the people that are right there that God's putting in your community. And you've given some tools that could help a church do that. Your Baptist campus ministry on all of our major universities here in Kentucky have international populations of students. It's an incredibly strategic opportunity to reach people for Christ, and in an important time in their life as they're being equipped to live the rest of their life, whatever that might look like. And again, send home international students with an awareness of the gospel and hopefully equipped to be missionaries locally, globally, wherever God would put, and then the partnerships that exist all around us. John, thinking about a young person that's kind of pursuing God's call on their life, what advice would you give for someone that is praying about or maybe already beginning to try to prepare for serving as an international missionary through the IMB or maybe another mission organization?
Sure. So first of all, I'd say, talk to your pastor, talk to leaders at your church, begin to foster just that prayer around you so you can start to have that discussion. Certainly with IMB, begin to take a step towards reaching out. There's consultants that can help you journey through with your church. But on the very practical side is, I would say, what we're talking about here, perfect opportunity. I always say, hey, if you won't do it here, why would anyone think you're going to do it over there?
Yes.
Right? Look at ways to get involved and to get connected with the internationals in your community, or if they're not right there in your community, across your state, or looking at opportunities, whether it's in a Sin City or there are go opportunities to go overseas to get that experience. One of the ministry centers with Send Relief, but get connected with the community and start engaging with that while you're here. Because one of the questions, we're going with IMB, they're going to ask you is, hey, how have you been sharing the gospel?
Right.
How have you been engaged? What better way to get equipped to go overseas and to pursue that calling than to start reaching out to the international community here? And as you said, one of the great ways to do it as a young person as well is not only with the refugees, but on our campuses. You have so many opportunities with our BCM leaders. They're always looking for churches and people to get involved. Great way to build that relationship and share the gospel.
Yeah, so incredibly helpful. Crossing the sea is not what makes one a missionary. If we're not
That's
learning
right.
how to live with gospel intentionality here, you've nailed it. So what better opportunity than find ways to serve even as you're pursuing that call, to be equipped and to clarify God's calling on your life. I want to clarify one thing you said earlier, Johnny. You talking about international students. If I heard you correctly, you said on average it's maybe 5 years before an international student or an immigrant really gets an invitation into someone's home. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, that's right. The average that we see over and over again is before they get an invitation to someone's home that they would consider to be someone from that host culture. So from America. It's not that an American maybe of another nationality to invite them over, but who they would consider to be that. And so hospitality as mission is such a great way to engage. You don't lose the intentionality, but so many other cultures, if you've been on an international trip or been in the home of someone from another culture, you'll see very quickly how hospitable they are. Right. You know, your Congolese friends will bring out, 25 Cokes, to say, hey, drink this. They're not saying drink all of those. They're saying, hey, we care about you. Right. We love you. We want to engage. And so when we extend hospitality back and invite people in, it opens up a huge door because no one's doing that. And it's a simple way to start to get to know people. Even if you're fumbling around a little bit with language, it's a way to say, hey, we care about you, we love you. And one thing I would say is if you're doing that with one of your friends, most of my experience has been with Islam, it's okay. If they start sharing about what they believe, don't panic. Let them share and be praying while they share because they fully expect you to share back with them. In fact, Muslims are some of the easiest people to share with. That's an opposite of what you might hear because they are going to share with you. Listen, and then share your testimony. Share about what God's done in your life. And I call it, on the other side, call it underestimating the power of the Holy Spirit. Yeah. As you share, you have the truth to share with them. And God uses that to open the door. But so much of it is God uses just that invitation, that hospitality, or somebody stepping in because no one else is.
Yeah. That's so incredibly helpful, John. Thank you so much. I thought during our ministry years in a church in Bowling Green that because we were very involved as a church in sending teams internationally and partnerships, and I thought I was hospitable, if I could say it that way, gracious in greeting people, and we would have them into our home. But I didn't realize how weak I was in that area until God called us to live cross-culturally. And we were those who were received with incredible hospitality on the mission field. And I realized then, oh goodness, there's so much more I could have and should have been doing for those who were either on our campus as international students or immigrants that our church was trying to minister to. And so, yeah, you're so right, that hospitality opportunity. That's really helpful. Thank you for leaning into that. Well, John, this podcast is called Leadership Lessons. And so in the time that we have left, could you share with us an experience in your own life that has impacted your view and maybe your approach to spiritual leadership?
Sure. Well, one, I was blessed to grow up with a godly father as a pastor and just taught me a lot about leadership and how to be patient and speak the truth in love. But when we're thinking about this with mission field context and that, I'll go back to on our first term, when we went out with the IMB to Uganda, there was a great missionary there, Frank Peavy, And he spent a lot of time with me and helped me to learn and just teach me how to not just run forward with the task, how to take time to listen to others and to engage well, but how to overcome the fear of failure. One of the things that he did was really encourage me as a young leader and said, hey, we're with you. We'd talk about plans, we'd make strategies, we'd pray, of course, and hear from the Lord and go and engage. But you know, from being on the mission field, things don't work as you want them to all the time. Right. And so we had a lot of stumbling going out there, but Frank journeying with me to encourage me as a leader to say, listen, and he would always say, let your young leaders lead. Hey, I want you to lead. We're with you. If you fall on your face, fall forward, right? And so we'll be there to help pick you up and to move forward with you, and gave a lot of encouragement, but also gave you freedom to share strategies and go out and engage and learn not to be afraid to fail. Do things as the Lord is leading, but to do it with confidence in Christ. But from that, I really learned about, one, empowering others so that you can, around you, as you build team, get the right people with the right gifting, know what your gifting is, so you can build a team that can really go and build the kingdom, but really encourage others and not be afraid to give them opportunities to lead out. Because in a kingdom work, we really want people to run farther than we can go. You know, we need each other. I think that's one thing I'd say in the U.S. I saw coming back from the mission field is, you know, individualism is killing the American church, right? We have not learned as well how to work together. And so a lot of times we have an Instagram, I call it Instagram faith, where we're looking around, God loves so-and-so, God loves so-and-so, but I don't know what my role really is. So in leadership, coming alongside, encouraging, helping people identify their gifts and skills, and helping them to get plugged into the kingdom. But I'd say coming over the fear of failure and really being able to encourage others were two things I learned from Frank Peavy that have stuck with me my whole life.
Well, that's leadership gold. Thankful for Frank's investment into your life and your investment in the lives of so many others over the years, John. We're really grateful for your faithfulness to the Lord, you providing a model for many of us of what gospel intentionality can look like. And we're excited to see how the Lord will use you and your new team with the IMB in partnership with them to help churches start, grow, multiply works with displaced peoples wherever that opportunity might be.
Yeah, we just want to help you discover the opportunities, develop that strategy, and then really equip your church. Because you can be involved in church planting among the nations right here in the U.S.
That's a great word. John, thank you again for your willingness to be a part of Leadership Lessons.
Thank you, Rob.